I'm John Walstead, the director of the Michigan Masonic Museum and Library in Grand Rapids. The museum and library is a service of the Michigan Masonic Charitable Foundation, which is a subsidiary corporation of the Grand Lodge of Michigan, Free and Accepted Masons. This is one of a series of legacy interviews with past Grand Masters of Michigan Masonry. In 1826, several lodges gathered in Detroit to form the Grand Lodge of Michigan, Free and Accepted Masons. The first Grand Master was Lewis Cass, at that time the territorial governor. Since the founding of the Grand Lodge in 1826, 165 Michigan Masons have held the illustrious position of Grand Master. In the fall of 2011, 24 past Grand Masters of Michigan Masonry are living. These men have come from diverse walks of life, from humble pursuits to positions of high influence. Each of them has had a story to tell. The following is an interview capturing the recollections of one of those past Grand Masters.
Hello. We're glad to have with us today Walter F. Wheeler, who was Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Michigan in 2006 and 2007. Today he's the Executive Director of the Michigan Masonic Charitable Foundation. Hello, Walt.
Hi, John.
You're a very busy man. You have a wonderfully understanding wife, Vicki. Just to give us a little idea of how fortunate we are to have you for a few hours today, tell us about your last trip and your next trip, perhaps.
Well, about a week ago, we were in Florida attending a reunion of Michigan Masons in Venice, Florida. It was well attended. Over 200 Michigan Masons were there. And then we were home for one day, and we were off to New York, this time for a personal trip, so Vicki did go with me. And we attended the 6th birthday of our granddaughter. And we're home for a few days, and this Friday we leave for the Conference of Grand Masters in Atlanta, Georgia. And from there we're off to Arizona for another reunion of Michigan Masons.
Excellent. You're very well known as a relatively recent past Grand Master, and one of your reputations is for your ritual skill, which is to say memorization and delivery in our ceremonies. You're also known in inner circles because of your financial experience. There's something else, though, that probably the average Mason is not aware of, and that's that you have, for many years, been very interested, a passion perhaps, in presidential trivia, if that's not trivializing it too much to call it that. Tell us a little bit about what spurred your interest in that matter of presidential trivia.
Well, I've always been interested in politics as long as I can remember, and the presidency in particular has always appealed to me. I remember being a very young man and being the only person in my class that wore a Nixon's the One pin. We were very, very active in politics from a very young age. And so I always wanted to learn more about the presidents and the presidency, and I read as many books as I could on it, and it did become kind of a hobby or a passion. And I started to put together my own little show that I'd take on the road, a slideshow back then. And I would talk about presidents and trivial facts about the presidents. And then later I tailored one to just Masonic presidents. And I made that presentation to several groups around the state, Masonic and non-Masonic groups. And it was a lot of fun. I did that for a long time.
Because those two interests of the presidents and politics really went hand in hand, I presume, in your youth and younger days as a Mason. What did you take away from that interest that has helped you, perhaps, in Masonry?
I think just being involved and having a concern, and in politics, I think most people in government are there to help people, and I think we're the same in the fraternity. We're out to help others, not just ourselves, and Masonry, through its charitable endeavors, does that for a lot of people. And in politics, I think most politicians are trying to do the same thing. They're trying to help people and do what's right.
Let's go back a moment now to your younger days, start closer to the beginning. I recently happened to see your third grade class picture, and who was first in the picture but Walt Wheeler? I can't help but wonder if maybe there might have been an element in your mind of that Pennsylvania Masonic campaign. Is there greatness in you? And if you felt a little greatness then, but I'm not going to ask that. Instead, I am interested to know what got you to that point and beyond in the form of your parents, Dale and Helene. Tell us a bit about your parents, what they did, and your childhood.
Well, I was an only child. I was born in Grand Rapids, raised in Wyoming, Michigan. We moved to Wyoming when I was 2 years old. And my parents were both born in Michigan, both actually in Grand Rapids, Michigan. They met after my dad got home from the Navy. He served tour of duty in the Navy over in the Far East, Okinawa and different places over there. And he and my mom kind of met on a blind date, and one thing led to another, and they ended up getting married and having me. My dad worked several jobs over his lifespan, but for most of my adult life, or most of my life actually, he was a travel agent. First with Travelese Travel Agency, and then later with Small World Travel. And he did that for a long time. And actually, that's how I got into the travel business when I started my work career. My mother, when I was little, she stayed at home, and then as I got a little bit older, she went out and worked at different places. I remember she worked at a pharmacy, and she worked at Montgomery Ward's for a while. But I mostly remember her as being a home mother. And a lot of times when I was younger, she used to take care of other children. So even though I was an only child, there were always other kids in the house, so I didn't always get to act like an only child.
Now, when you were 14, you began your career in the Masonic family, so to speak, by joining the Order of De Molay. And I know you have a number of happy memories associated with that, which lasted some 7 years. Would you share some of those memories and also some thoughts about how your De Molay experience may have helped to prepare you for Masonry?
I do have many happy memories of my De Molay time. I remember when I first joined De Molay, my dad actually came home and told me about it. My dad was a Mason, and he came home and told me he wanted me to join this organization. And I wasn't too crazy about the idea at the time, but he told me that I want you to try it, and if you don't like it, you don't have to keep going, but I want you to try it. And so I did try it, and I loved it. I still remember to this day my initiation ceremony. It was actually at the Granville Masonic Temple, even though it was Grand Rapids chapter. They were doing it for Crescent Lodge. And there were 7 of us that joined that day. And a couple of them became very good friends over the years. Craig Chalmers and Jerry Chesser and I and a few other guys. And I can remember it like it was yesterday, even though it was over 40 years ago now. And I got very involved with De Molay right away. I went into the officer line. I remember my first job was as the 7th preceptor, which was patriotism, which was a great precept for me to have for my first one. I went on to become master counselor, which was a highlight, and then later district master counselor. I think one of the most memorable things about my De Molay career was when I got the letter that I had been elected to receive the degree of Chevalier, which when you're a 16 or 17-year-old kid, that's a big honor in De Molay. I still consider that one of the highlights of my life today. As far as what it prepared me, I think it did prepare me for the Masonic fraternity, because De Molay teaches a lot of the things that the Masonic fraternity teaches, and I think it definitely prepares you. I remember when I took my degrees in Masonry, at least the first 2, it was exactly what I thought it would be, because it was so similar to De Molay.
Vicki Reese Wheeler has been your wife for a good many years now, and the love of your life and more. Tell us a bit about that relationship today.
Well, Vicki and I met because of De Molay. She was in Job's Daughters, and the Jobs attended a De Molay installation at the Grand Rapids Masonic Center. And I remember the first time I saw her, she walked in the door and she had very long black hair, which attracted my attention immediately. And after the installation, we had a party at Marty Amon's house. Marty was the master counselor, and his dad, Dick Amon, was business manager of the Grand Lodge for many years. And so we were at a party in Dick's basement, and I kept looking over at Vicki, but I was much too shy to talk to girls back then. So finally she came over and started talking to me. And we found out that we were going to be going to the same high school together. And so when high school started, we went to a fairly large school. It took me about a week to find her, and after I found her, I never let her out of my sight after that. We went together all through high school, got married when we were 20 years old, and have been married for going on 36 years now.
Wonderful. Another of your little-known hobbies is genealogy, something I'll say that you inherited from your mother, to use a very bad pun. Tell us some things that you've learned in that regard about your extended family.
Genealogy was a hobby that my mother got me involved with. She's been doing genealogy for as long as I can remember, and was always very involved with it, and traveled to different libraries around the country looking up genealogical information, because when she started doing it, they didn't have the internet. And so you had to go look in books and look up records. And she got me interested in it. And I found it fascinating to find out about your roots and your ancestors. And everything, of course, now is computerized. And I think I currently have around 27,000 names on my family tree, because it's amazing how fast it expands the farther back you go. We have some of our family lines back to about the 600s. And we do run into some royal lines, which helps when you're getting back that old. But it's fascinating. It's just fascinating.
And now your family line includes 3 sons and grandchildren. Tell us about them.
I do have 3 sons. Our oldest son, Andrew, lives in Grand Island, New York. My middle son, Justin, lives here locally in Byron Center, Michigan. And our youngest son, Tyler, also lives in Wyoming. All 3 are now married to very wonderful women. And my oldest son, Andrew, has a daughter, Emma Grace, who just turned 6 years old. That's whose birthday party we went to in New York. And then my middle son, Justin, and his wife just had a new baby on Thanksgiving Day. Logan Reed Wheeler was born Thanksgiving Day, and he's doing just great. It's exciting to have grandchildren.
You attended college in Grand Rapids, as we know, but you also went to work full-time as a young man, and that was in, as you mentioned, the travel agency business. Tell us some lessons that you learned from that experience in serving the public.
My first full-time job, actually out of high school, was in the travel agency business. I started working for the agency that my dad worked at, and it was a wonderful experience. I met a lot of very influential businessmen and people in the West Michigan area, because the agency that I worked at was probably, without a doubt, the biggest agency in West Michigan. And so pretty much everybody came to our agency. So I had the opportunity to meet a lot of very influential and famous people, and to work with them and to learn from them. And I had the opportunity at a very young age to travel extensively, which was also a great experience and very useful later.
And then after a number of years, your business career took a very different turn, and a courageous one, I might say, when the opportunity and at least equal risk availed itself to get into the bowling industry. And that led to bigger and better things. Tell us about those years.
Well, I actually initially got into bowling when my oldest son Andrew was born. Vicki had been working up until the time Andy was born, and when he was born she wanted to take some time off. And so I was thinking about taking on a part-time job, an extra job. And a friend of mine who was managing a local bowling center, the Comet at the time, said I could get you a part-time job at the Comet. And so I thought, well, that'd be great. And so I started working part-time at the Comet Lanes when Andy was born. And I did that even after Vicki went back to work, just simply because I liked it. It was so different from my other job, and it gave me an opportunity to meet a lot of people, and I really enjoyed it. Well, after I left the travel agency, I went to work at the Comet full-time as their manager. And within just a few months after making that change, the same gentleman who got me the job at the Comet in the first place came to me and said, I think I'm going to open my own bowling center. Would you like to be partners? And I thought about it, and I said, yeah. And so we went and we opened a bowling center from scratch. We built it ourselves, including putting 40,000 nails in each of our 40 lanes, and it was an interesting experience. Not one that I'd want to repeat, but it was certainly an experience building a business that large from scratch.
And that grew into a long-time career, including the restaurant and alcohol business. Tell us a bit about those aspects.
We did have a full-service restaurant and a sports lounge. We were a very busy lounge and a very busy restaurant. We were in the business, well, I left 2 years ago, so I was in the business for about 26 years.
And perhaps by happenstance, but you were also, during that time, associated in the ownership with 2 other members of our lodge.
Yes, and actually, one of them became a member because of me. I talked to him about masonry, and it was kind of funny because I'd always had Masonic things at my desk at work, and I was always working on Masonic stuff and going to Masonic events. And one day my partner asked me, he said, "How come you've never asked me to join the Masons?" That was all that took, and he became a Mason. Our other partner, I actually did not know he was a Mason when we became partners. And it wasn't until a time later, and I think he found out I was a Mason because he got a news magazine and my picture happened to be in it. And he mentioned that he was a Mason, and I said, "Really?" And I said, "What lodge do you belong to?" And when he said Grand Rapids Lodge, I almost fell off my chair because obviously that's my lodge. So we both belonged to the same lodge and we had no idea. So that actually changed our relationship a little bit when we found out we were both Masons.
When you were a boy and you joined De Millay, your dad, Dale, was already a Master Mason, and then while you were at De Millay, I believe, he became master of his lodge. And so you grew up knowing some of his Masonic friends, I expect. And here I might mention to our audience that Dale Wheeler was interviewed recently, and that interview is also available through the Charitable Foundation website. Tell us about your introduction with your dad, I'm sure, to local lodge masonry.
I really don't remember my first introduction into the fraternity. My dad was involved with the lodge when I was very young. He joined when I was 2 years old, and so he was basically a Mason my whole life. And he became an officer in the lodge, and I remember going to several lodge functions with my dad. We'd go to Tiger baseball games and Lion football games and picnics. And I really, by the time I joined the lodge, I knew pretty much everybody in the lodge already, and they knew me because I'd grown up there. It was an interesting time for me. I mentioned at my Grand Lodge session when I talked about joining the fraternity that I learned how to play poker on Grand River Lodge bus trips to Lions games and Tiger games. I don't remember not knowing about the Masonic fraternity. It's always been a part of my life.
You were quite a young worshipful master as things go. I believe you were 28 at the time. And what are some of the things you remember from that experience, which dates back to 1985?
I remember it was a very exciting time. I enjoyed very much being master of the lodge. I made my dad the chaplain so that he was sitting next to me so that if I needed any advice or help with anything, he was sitting right there to help me. The secretary of our lodge when I was master had been secretary of the lodge for 45 years. His name was Dale Williams. And Dale was just a wonderful man, and he was Grand River Lodge at that time, later Grand Rapids Lodge. Anybody who had joined the lodge in the last 50 years, Dale knew him personally. And when I had first become master of the lodge, we had a member of the lodge die. And I remember I asked Dale, "Well, what do we do?" And Dale said, "Well, you're the master, it's your responsibility." And so from then on, I accepted that responsibility and did what I had to do. But it was a wonderful time being master of the lodge. I enjoyed it very much. I remember one of the, I don't know if I'd call it a highlight of my time as master, but while I was master, we had a member die from another lodge. And they called Grand Lodge and asked if there was anybody that could do the graveside service. And so they called and asked if I would do it as a courtesy to this lodge, and I said that I would. So I went out to Ravenna and did the graveside service as a courtesy for this lodge. And I was going along doing it, and there was nobody there as far as Masons that knew the ceremony at all. And somehow a word put me into the memorial service outside of the graveside service. And all of a sudden I was coming up to a part where I was going to have to be lighting candles, and I was starting to panic. You know, you keep going in your mind, but you're starting to get a little bit nervous because you know you're not in the right place. And fortunately, another word put me right back on track. But I think that was probably one of my scariest times doing ritual work, because I knew there was nobody there that was going to be able to help me. I was on my own. That's a very vivid memory.
Compared with the gravity of the moment.
Yes.
Now, coming forward in time since your days as a young master, your considerable Masonic resume indicates that you've branched out through all the major areas of Masonry, the Scottish Rite, the York Rite, the Shrine, and many others. What did you find in those organizations, and what do you see today that drew you to them and makes you feel they are still viable in today's world?
I think that each one of the pendant organizations has something to offer. They're all unique in their own right. They each have something appealing, whether it be the ritual work, the teachings, the philanthropies. The Shrine, for example, what appealed to me to the Shrine was the philanthropy. You know, they help the crippled children in the burns hospitals, and I find that very admirable. What appealed me to the Scottish Rite was completely different. It was basically their ritual work. The degrees of the Scottish Rite and the plays that they put on just greatly appealed to me, and I enjoyed that aspect of that very much. The same with the York Rite. The York Rite degrees are very profound. They're very meaningful. The Order of the Temple and the Commandery, I think, is one of the most beautiful, they call it an order, one of the most beautiful orders I've ever seen. It's very memorable. So each of them has their own thing to offer, and I think they're each relevant. I think each of them are trying to find their way, because the world is changing as always, and sometimes we lag a little bit, but they'll find their way.
Many of the members of the fraternity who watch this will undoubtedly be Scottish Rite Masons. You worked your way through the ranks of the Valley of Grand Rapids also at a relatively young age. You played the coveted and heroic role of Constans in the 32nd degree, and you served the Valley as its commander-in-chief, and then were recognized with the 33rd degree in 1997. You were tapped not too many years later for greater Scottish Rite service as an active member or voting member of the Scottish Rite Supreme Council in the Northern Masonic jurisdiction. Now, although you're a relatively junior member of that organization, what are some of your reflections on the Scottish Rite in general, and specifically on Supreme Council membership?
Scottish Rite is actually, I don't think it's a secret, my favorite pendant organization. I've loved Scottish Rite from the moment I joined. It's had an appeal to me. I go back to when I was 15 years old, and in De Molay, and I played the part of Jacques De Molay. And at that time, our ritual advisor was a man named George Collins. And George was a 33rd degree Mason and a past commander-in-chief. And George told me at that time, he said, someday you're going to be Constance in the 32nd degree. And I had no idea what George was talking about, but it proved to be prophetic. And from the time I joined, I remember watching the 32nd degree as a candidate, and it just blew me away. It just reached right out and grabbed me. And from the time that I joined the Scottish Rite in 1980 till today, I have never missed a reunion of the Valley of Grand Rapids. I find it that appealing. One of the great things of Scottish Rite, besides their degree work, I think, is the circle of friends that you make in the Scottish Rite. When you're in your own little lodge, you have a small little circle of friends, and you might know a few guys in other lodges, but when you join an organization like Scottish Rite, it expands over a huge geographic area, and all of a sudden you know guys in dozens of lodges, if not, 100 lodges. And it just greatly expands your circle of friendship, and I think your Masonic knowledge as well. As far as the Supreme Council, I was When I was asked to become an active member of the Supreme Council, I obviously considered that a great honor. There are very few men that have the opportunity to serve as active members. In the Northern Masonic jurisdiction, there are 50 active members in the 15 states that comprise the Northern Masonic jurisdiction. And the Supreme Council is responsible for the governance of the Scottish Rite in the Northern Masonic jurisdiction. And it's been very enlightening to be a part of that governance structure. I was appointed to the Finance Committee of the Supreme Council, and recently I was elected as a director of the Children's Learning Centers, the Children's Dyslexia Centers. And I've learned a great deal about the fraternity and Scottish Rite in those two positions.
Excuse me, let me pause a moment to give an updated instruction here. Watching the clock and so on, we're doing very well on time, and I'm going to suggest, Walt, that contrary to anything I might have said previously, don't feel you have to abbreviate or shorthand any answers. If something that I ask you about and you're speaking of clicks some memory, you might say, let me give you a little example of that or a story associated that.
Okay.
We're doing well on time in that regard.
Okay.
What do you say?
I'm always sweet, short and sweet.
Short, at least. Okay, continuing. You've also, in your Masonic career, gone through the chairs of the York Rite in Freemasonry, which is perhaps not as well known or thought of in your regard because it's more Grand Rapids centric. But because we know that the York Rite has had many of Mason's icons over generations in its leadership, what are some of your feelings about the place of the York Rite in Freemasonry in the world today?
I think York Rite still has a place in the fraternity. The York Rite degrees are, I consider them a continuation of the Blue Lodge degrees, a continuation of the teachings and the examples, and very meaningful. The orders of the Knights Templar, as I mentioned earlier, are, I think, outstanding and very great lessons of mortality and to get to know oneself. I look at the York Rite more like a lodge because it is localized, so you belong to a local group. Although it comprises members of many lodges, it's still more local. The bodies in Grand Rapids have members from Rockford and Sparta and Grand Rapids and Hastings and Holland, but it's still pretty central, whereas Scottish Rite is a much wider area of membership. Goes from Traverse City to the Indiana border. So I guess the local chapters of Royal Arch and councils and commanderies are more like a lodge. It's a smaller group of men, but no less a great group of men and great teachings.
Going back to symbolic or craft masonry now, every leader comes to prominence by a different pathway. What do you recall about your being attracted to the Grand Lodge? And I gather it was more than fame. And how did it all begin for you?
I actually remember we were at the Grand Rapids Masonic Temple and we had attended a meeting of Grand Rapids Lodge, and there were a group of us sitting at a table afterwards having coffee, and we were talking about the upcoming Grand Lodge session and how there were going to be a couple of vacancies this year because of a death in the Grand Lodge line. And a couple of the guys sitting at the table said, "You should run for Grand Lodge." And I remember thinking about it a little bit, and at first I kind of took it as just being a humorous little statement. But as I thought about it, I thought, this is really an opportunity to serve the craft, and there might not be a better time, because having two vacancies, sometimes it's hard for people from West Michigan, or at that time, people from West Michigan to get elected. So I might have a better chance of getting elected because there were two vacancies. So I went home and I talked to my wife about it, and I told her that I was really seriously considering running for Grand Lodge. And she wasn't real excited about that in the beginning, but she eventually came around and gave me the okay to do it. And so I started traveling around the state, campaigning, if you will, and was elected at Grand Lodge.
Do Do you have some memories of those travels as a candidate?
Yeah, we went to a number of locations. Went up to the UP, remember? We went to Escanaba for an event. I remember going over to the Flint area for an event. And I went to a district meeting over there. And the meeting, they had a very large turnout of members from all the lodges in that area. It was District 20 at that time, which was a very powerful district in the state. And they were debating something, and I remember past Grand Master Bob Sanborn getting up and talking. And I remember just watching him and being so amazed at the way he controlled that room. Not because he was trying to, but just because when he stood up and talked, everybody listened. Before that, it was kind of every man for himself, but I was very impressed with his control of the room. Which actually makes me think back to the very first Grand Lodge session I ever attended was as junior warden of my lodge. Our lodge used to send the junior warden, senior warden, and master. And it was Bob Sanborn's Grand Lodge session. And I remember watching Bob sit up there and run that Grand Lodge session and being so impressed, you know, looking out. I'd never been in a room where there was 1,000 Masons before, and it was very impressive, and Bob did a great job then, too. So he's impressed me more than once.
You've mentioned Grand Master Sanborn. Almost every Grand Master points to other past Grand Masters who they consider as their mentors, who were really of value to them. Can you talk about one or more of those?
There were several past Grand Masters that I have great respect for and I look up to. Past Grand Master John Polzin, past Grand Master Ernie Hoffman, were men that I actually, when I was contemplating running for Grand Lodge, I called both of them to get their input and advice. When I became a Grand Lodge officer, there were a few others that became very influential and very good friends. Past Grand Master Don Boyer, past Grand Master Bob Conley, past Grand Master David Bedwell. I consider all mentors and friends. When I became a Grand Lodge officer, Bob Conley was the Grand Master. And I was just so impressed with the way that he did everything that he did. And he still impresses me to this day. He's a great Mason and a great leader.
What were a couple of the challenges that you faced during your years in the leadership of the Grand Lodge?
We had a lot of challenges, and some of them we still face today. I think some of the things that we did that have made a difference is we started the renewal program, and that was a big and a long-term effort. We initially started it as a 5-year plan, but it's now gone beyond that. We continue to update and modify it. But that was a big deal when we started the 5-year plan and the renewal of Freemasonry in Michigan. And part of the 5-year plan was the public relations portion of it. And that actually happened in my year as Grand Master when we started doing things like Tiger Radio and billboards and newspapers and started to promote the fraternity a little bit because we felt that it was important that people knew who we were. 100 years ago, everybody knew who the Masons were and what they did, but today that's not true. So we kind of have to tell people who we are and what we do in order for them to have any interest at all in joining us, because if they don't know, why would they want to join us? So that was a very important thing. One of the other important issues that we worked very hard on, and unfortunately were not successful, was the property tax relief for our Masonic Temple associations. We made a great effort in getting Masonic Temple associations exempted from property taxes. We worked very hard with representatives in the House and representatives in the State Senate. It passed both of those bodies by overwhelming margins, almost unanimously. And then unfortunately the governor vetoed it because of the economic times facing the state. And unfortunately it's not gotten any better for the state of Michigan, although maybe things are starting to turn around and we can bring that proposal forward again. It was a lot of work, and it would have paid great benefits had it passed.
I venture to say that there is often at least a perceived disconnect between the local lodge leadership and the Grand Lodge officers, the work of the Grand Lodge. What can you say to encourage local lodges that the Grand Lodge is there really to serve them and to make their level of Masonry better throughout the jurisdiction?
And I think what you said is exactly true. The Grand Lodge is there to serve them, and we are there to try to help them and to do things that maybe individually they can't do, but as a group we can. The men that I've known that have served our Grand Lodge, I have nothing but the greatest respect for. Every one of them, even though I may not have always agreed with them, have always done, I think, what they thought was best for the fraternity and best for Masonry in the state of Michigan. I know sometimes there's a us versus them mentality, but the Grand Lodge officers are the men that the lodges have selected to lead their organization. And if the lodges are not happy with the men, then they need to select different ones. You know, they have the vote, they have the final say. And so I don't look at it as us versus them, it's just a big lodge, so to speak. Every lodge has a voice, every lodge has a vote, and every lodge should participate. They should stand up and say what they think and what they would like to see happen. And a lot of the things that have happened in the state of Michigan over the last 10 or 12 years, which I think are very positive, are because of things that the craft have asked for, or because of things that they've wanted to see happen, or because of things that maybe we've seen other states do that we bring back to Michigan and implement. But the Grand Lodge is not a separate entity. It is the lodges. The lodges make up the Grand Lodge. We're just the officers of the Grand Lodge.
Right along that line, would you speak a little more specifically about the relative roles of the Grand Lodge in session versus the responsibilities and authority of the Grand Master when the Grand Lodge is not in session?
Well, when the Grand Lodge is in session, the delegates are the supreme authority. They have the say over what happens. They have the say over basically everything. When the Grand Lodge is not in session, the Grand Master is basically the person that they have selected to lead their organization, and they have given him powers to do that. Sometimes I don't think the powers go far enough, and sometimes perhaps they go too far, but that's a different debate. I think the Grand Masters, for the most part, have done a good job in exercising those powers. They may have been abused from time to time, but for the most part, I think the Grand Masters have done a good job exercising those authorities. They say, and Bill Sauget, who's the chairman of jurisprudence for many years now, will tell the delegates every year at Grand Lodge that the Grand Master is the Grand Lodge when the Grand Lodge is not in session. But when the Grand Lodge is in session, then those delegates, the masters of those 300 lodges, are the supreme authority. And everything that the Grand Master does during the year, he has to bring back to those 300 delegates. And they're the ones that say, yes, you did the right thing, or no, you did not. So they have the ultimate authority.
Today is the cyber age, if I haven't been watching closely enough, and maybe that's already passed too. But if not generations of ages have been swept into the dustbin, and you are still serving on the front lines of leadership in Michigan Masonry and the Supreme Council, which means that you're looking to the future. And it's important that your thinking and your actions be in tune with not just today, but the future. Share some of your thoughts on how we are succeeding in Masonry along that forward-thinking curve.
I think in Michigan Masonry, we are making some serious progress. I think, unfortunately, for a long time, we didn't. I think for almost a generation, we didn't change anything. We didn't do anything different. We became so big that certain things didn't concern us. And even when things started to go down, we were still so big that they still didn't concern us. And when it started to concern us, it was already too late. The slide had already begun. And so over the last, I would say, 10 or 12 years, maybe even a little bit longer, I think we've made some great strides. We've tried to move the fraternity forward. We've tried to bring it into the 21st century because I think basically we missed the 20th century. We're trying to bring it into the electronic age. We're trying to appeal to younger men because I think if you look at the young men of today, I think Masonry has what they want, they just don't know it. And once we let them know, they're joining. And if you look at the number of young men in the fraternity today compared to 20 years ago, the number of men under the age of 35 is much, much larger. Unfortunately, it hasn't been enough to offset those that were much older and have passed on. But we're making progress, and the number of initiations of new Master Masons in the last few years as compared to the previous decades are up again. And I look at that as a very encouraging sign. So I think we're doing some of the right things. We're not there yet, but we're getting there. We're making progress.
I'm reminded that beyond the cyber age, perhaps we're also in the information age. And communication has always been an ongoing challenge for all organizations. But in Masonry, because of the way we're organized, I'm sure it's been a greater challenge. We don't have a constantly participating constituency or membership. But I know that Grand Lodge has taken steps in that direction. Could you speak about a few of the specifics with regard to electronic communication?
Well, certainly we've tried to move into the electronic era. Grand Lodge has a very good website. We have a presence on Facebook. We're doing Twitter pages now. We're involved in LinkedIn. Pretty much all of the modern communication tools are being taken advantage of. We have an e-news that goes out every week. And now it's just getting a larger number of the craft participating in those types of media. One of the big advantages to electronic media is it's immediate. If something happens where it used to take us weeks to notify the craft because you'd have to do it by stale mail or telephone calls, it can be done instantaneously now. I mean, you can let thousands of people know within a minute of something that's, you know, of importance. And I think that that's a very useful tool, but we just have to get the craft used to using it. We have a great membership system now in Maury. It can do a lot of things that we're not taking full advantage of yet, and that's another part of our job, to train the craft on exactly what Maury can do, because it can do a lot. And it can help us track our membership better, and it can help us, I think, grow the fraternity in the long run by being involved and active and taking advantage.
Stepping back a moment to look at the greater picture, the worldview, in your experience, can you point to a single Masonic principle, or maybe one or two, that have really been most helpful for you, that are basic to the craft?
You know, I don't know if there's a single tenet, but there are certainly a couple of them that I think are very important. One of them you'll learn in the Entered Apprentice degree, and that's brotherly love. I think Masonry is a unique organization in that if I meet a Mason, I have an immediate bond with that Mason. I have an immediate connection with him that I have never found in any other organization. I have an immediate trust for him, unless he proves otherwise. And I think it's just a unique bond that no other organization has. And you know, I think brotherly love is a big part of that. Truth is a big part of that. Justice, things that Masonry teaches are the reasons that we have the relationship with each other that we do. I've had the opportunity through Masonry to travel around the United States and throughout the world, and I've met Masons from all over the world. And you have an instant friendship with them. It's unique, and I think it's great. I think it's one of the greatest parts about our fraternity. And I guess I'd call that brotherly love. I guess that would be the tenet that I would most have to say changed my life or has influenced me.
On a lighter note, you have a reputation as a very kind and light-hearted past Grand Master. I'm going to ask you to tell a little story that you've told me that occurred while you were Grand Master. You were fortunate to serve during the time that there was the World Conference of Grand Masters, and when you got there, there was a mistake on your name badge, which was pretty important because of the nature of the men who were there. Tell us about that.
Well, I did attend the World Conference of Grand Masters. It was in Paris, France, which was a great experience all by itself.
And you better say you took your wife.
I did take my wife, yes. And when we were attending the World Conference, there were grandmasters from all over the world there, and 2 of them happened to be presidents of their country. So security was very high at the conference. And every person that attended had to have a name badge with their picture on it and an ID thing, and you had to go through metal detectors and all kinds of security. My name badge said Walter F. Wheeler, Grand Master of the United States of America, instead of Grand Master of Michigan. And so some of my friends that were there from other states, Pennsylvania and New York, Illinois, they're like, well, you can get that changed. And I said, no, I'm not changing it. I like being Grand Master of the United States of America. So I kept that name tag the whole time. And the guys gave me, especially the guys from the United States, gave me some
guff.
Some guff, yep, to deal with that. And I remember one time in particular, I went to open a door, and the Grand Master in New York said, oh, no, let me get that. I'm just Grand Master in New York. You're Grand Master of the United States. But it was a wonderful experience. I might say that during the conference itself, it kind of reminded me of being at the UN. You had to wear a headset, and you picked a language that you wanted to listen in. You could pick English or French or Spanish, and I think there was one other language. So they actually had interpreters in the back that were, whatever language the speaker was speaking in was being translated into whatever language you picked to listen in. It was a wonderful experience.
You did pick English?
I did pick English, yes.
Oh, that's good. That's good. From your perspective today, you have quite a handle on the past of Masonry, and much more than the vast majority of Masons, you also have a handle on the present of our Masonry. What's your handle on the future of Freemasonry?
I'm optimistic on the future of Freemasonry. I don't know that we've bottomed out yet, but I think that we're close, and I can see things improving in the fraternity. As I said, I'm very encouraged by the number of young men joining the fraternity and their enthusiasm for Masonry. They're enthusiastic about what Masonry teaches. They're enthusiastic about our philanthropy. They're enthusiastic about learning about the history of Masonry and the esoteric part of Masonry. And I'm very optimistic that Masonry is going to survive, and it's going to be stronger in the years to come.
Along that line, what do you see as some of the more immutable facts of Masonry that have kept it viable as an institution in the lives of literally millions of young men, older men, middle-aged men, for centuries now?
I guess I'd have to go back to the brotherly love thing. I think Masons care about each other. They care about humanity. They want to do the right thing. And they have a bond with each other that is so strong. I look back to, the 1950s when the fraternity peaked, and we had so many members of the military joining our fraternity. And I think the thing that drove those men to Masonry was that bond, that camaraderie, the friendship. Because in the military, they had that in their unit or in their division. And when they left the military, it was something they missed. I think all men seek that. They seek that acceptance, that belonging. And thousands of men, tens of thousands, millions of men have found that in the Masonic fraternity. And I think men today still want that camaraderie, that friendship, that belonging to something greater than oneself. And I think we have it in the Masonic fraternity, and it's just our job to let everybody know, for those that it is going to apply to, it's the organization you need to belong to. It's I think the greatest fraternity in the history of the world, but I might be a little prejudiced.
We expect that you have many more good workable years for our fraternity, but let me ask you a couple of rocking chair questions. Sitting where you sit today, what advice do you have for the young Master Mason out there?
I guess the advice I would give any young Master Mason is to be as involved as you can. It's a cliche, but it's true. You get out of the fraternity what you put into the fraternity. And I think you get out of it tenfold what you put into it. I know that's certainly the case in mine experience. And I would encourage them not to wait. I know a lot of gentlemen that say, well, I want to wait until I'm older. And I would encourage them to do it while you're young and you can enjoy it and take advantage of your youth and your energy, because that's not always going to be there. And yeah, don't wait. Do it now.
Let's split that hair a little further and ask, what advice do you have for a new worshipful master or one who would be?
I think the advice I would give a new worshipful master is have a couple of people who you trust to be able to ask questions to, mentors. I think it's very helpful, especially for a young master, to have somebody whose opinion he trusts completely, that he can bounce things off of. The other thing I would tell a young master is, remember, you are the master. So even though you have these men that you may trust and whose opinion you value, it's still your decision. It's your lodge, and you're the one that's responsible. So listen to them, but then do what you think is the right thing to do.
Splitting it one step further, what advice might you have for the aspiring Grand Lodge officer?
I would think for somebody that's interested in Grand Lodge, I would tell them that it would be one of the greatest experiences of their life if they get elected to a Grand Lodge office. But it is a huge commitment. You are on the road almost constantly, and as you progress through the line, it gets even worse. And when you're Grand Master, that year, you're basically dedicating to Masonry. It's not a part-time job once you become Grand Master. And that's why it's very difficult for some men who are still employed to do the job. I was very fortunate when I was Grand Master that I was self-employed, and my partner and I kind of made a deal. And had we not, I don't know how I could have done it, because it's a huge commitment of time and money, but mostly time. So make sure that you have the time to commit. But if you do have the time to commit, it's a great experience.
You have been down many roads in Masonry. You've covered many miles, and I'm sure that there was no point in your younger years where you aspired to all of that. I suspect it just came to you largely. From your perspective today, if you had it all to do over again, what, if anything, might you do differently?
You know, I don't know that I'd do anything differently. I've had a wonderful Masonic career, so to speak. I've enjoyed it tremendously. I've had the opportunity to do things that not a lot of men get to do. I've had the opportunity to go places that I would not have gone had it not been the fraternity. I have friends virtually around the world that I wouldn't have without the Masonic fraternity. So I don't know that I'd change anything. It's been just a wonderful experience. It's been a huge part of my life.
You've mentioned time, and the unforgiving moment has continued to clock away. And as we approach the end of this, I want to ask you a final question that's I won't diminish by calling it a plug, because I know this is something that's very near and dear to your heart and that you devote most all of your waking hours to, and that is the Michigan Masonic Charitable Foundation and its works. Talk to us about the foundation.
I am an employee of the Michigan Masonic Charitable Foundation, and I consider my work there as the greatest job in the world. With the foundation, we get to see a lot of things happen around the state of Michigan, and we get to see a lot of positive things, and we get to have a lot of positive influence. The Grand Lodge of Michigan has several charitable programs. Masonic Pathways is one. That's our largest charitable outreach, and it's a wonderful facility, and it's a great place to work. And every time I go there, I'm so proud of the fraternity.
For those who don't know Pathways, explain that a bit.
Pathways is the Michigan Masonic Home. It's a continuing care retirement facility for Masons, their widows, members of the Eastern Star, and the general public. And it's located in Alma, Michigan. It's a large, very large facility. We have over 400 residents and almost 400 staff. It's almost like a little city unto itself. And it's a first-class facility. It's one of the nicest, if not the nicest, retirement facility I've ever been in. And one of the greatest things about it is the atmosphere there. You can tell that the staff genuinely care about the residents. And even at the home, there's a camaraderie because it's based on Masonic principles and Masonic precepts, and most of the people there are members of the fraternity or members of the Order of Eastern Star. And it's its own little community, and it's just a great place to work. They do a wonderful job there. In addition to the Masonic Home, we have several other charities that we help sponsor. The Michigan Masonic Museum and Library, someplace I know you're familiar with. We sponsor the MI Chip program, or the My Chips, which is the child ID program, where we've ID'd, I think, in excess of 70,000 children in the state of Michigan now. We have the Student Assistance Training Program, where we train teachers how to recognize and intervene with at-risk children, at risk for substance abuse, physical abuse, bullying, which is a big thing in schools nowadays, depression, suicide. This is a great program that saves lives. The teachers that we've taught have actually come back to us and told of instances where they've intervened in children's lives and stopped a child from committing suicide or stopped other bad things from happening to children. It's a great program. We've trained over 1,600 teachers in Michigan, and we want to do a lot more. They say that each teacher impacts positively 8 children per year. So that means the teachers that we've taught thus far are impacting positively 12,000 children a year. And we want to continue that program and do even more with it. It's a great program. We have, trying to think now. This minute I just went blank. What other program do we have? Actually, we could, yeah, we'll do a plug for that. What do we have? We've got CHIPS, MSAP, Museum and Library.
There's like 7.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay, thanks. I'm glad somebody knows. All right. Are you ready?
Whenever.
All right. A couple of the other programs that we do that are very important. We do matching scholarships for our lodges. A lodge can give out a scholarship, and the foundation will match up to $1,500 a scholarship for that student or multiple students. We have our community matching grants for community charities, which is another program that the lodges are involved with, and they can give out up to $1,500 per year, and the foundation will match that for community charities. We've had some great success with that program. One of them recently was several lodges, I think about a dozen lodges in the Metro Detroit area got together, and they raised, with matching grants from the foundation, about $35,000 to help a young girl with cerebral palsy. And we've had some other efforts like that where lodges have band together and applied for matching grants from the foundation and made a big impact on people's lives and community charities. One that just happened last week, on relatively short notice, several lodges got together and put in monies and applied for matching grants from the foundation to help homeless veterans. It was a program through the VA hospital in Detroit, and they raised over $15,000 in less than a month, which I think is very admirable. So that's just some of the things that the foundation does, that Masonry does, that I think are impactful and important.
Thank you. We have come to the end of our time together. Past Grandmaster Walter F. Wheeler, Grandmaster Walt, thank you.
Thank you, John.
You're begging him because he's still rolling. Can you say anything about the Legacy series or the oral history?
No.
He said we'll keep that empty, but he just wants B-roll for the program. So
What's he talking about?
One of the things that the Michigan Masonic Museum and Library is working on right now is this oral history. We're doing the oral history program where we're interviewing several members of the craft, learning about their stories and the impact that they've had in their communities and in the fraternity, as well as the Grand Masters series, where we're interviewing all the past Grand Masters. And those are two very important programs of the foundation and of the museum and library. And we're very excited to fund those programs.
We certainly wish that we had all of the past Grand Masters on tape, but we're thankful for what we will have.